Hi, you're listening to the Cask and Culture podcast with Lee Robinson, aka Whiskey with Lee, and this week we have none other than Dr. Fionnán O'Connor, the Irish whiskey historian, to talk through historic mash bills, the Irish whiskey technical file. I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
So what's in the glass?
Cologne. So this arrived today. This is Cologne Balkan project I did with Brendan that has kind of grown up. So this is the 4-year-old in an ex-peated cask, transferred into a PX cask, and we called it The History of Eamon O'Clery, which is the name of an old book in which Balkan features quite prominently. So it seemed a kind of a fitting
Number.
mod.
I am currently. I have a big box of samples. I'm currently whipping through
the Quality Street box of samples by the looks of it. You know, the pink ones are the last to go as usual.
So what have I got here? Oh, there we go. We got a wee green spot. Quail's Gate. We'll start with that.
Very good.
So is everything well?
Absolutely. Again, sun's out in force today. Can't complain. It is quite hot, especially by North Atlantic standards. But I think even by just normal standards, it's quite hot at the moment. So you can feel the heat wave. But all good. We'll be complaining all through the winter. So
This is it. Did you get out for did you go out for a hike yesterday?
I did, yeah. So it's great on a weekday because there's fewer people. But I just went as far as Howth, and there's kind of a cliff walk around. Great little hike because the city, as soon as you have your back to the city and you're facing out toward the Irish Sea, you might forget you were even in Dublin. That's great.
Yeah. That's good. Good to get out and about.
I know.
Especially when you've got the weather for it, you know.
Great weather for it, yeah. I should add this whiskey is like heavily peated oats and heavily peated barley. It's the worst suited whiskey to this weather, but it arrived today and I intend to open it. So, I shan't be deterred by any instinct from the temperature.
I know, mate. It's sometimes like heavy pots. Those you go, this is not a warm weather whiskey.
Exactly. This belongs in the dead of winter.
Yeah.
Lashing rain outside, staring at a window pane as the rain trickles down and you're on the inside. That's good. That's proper pot still weather.
Something to warm you up, and you're going, it's 27 degrees. I don't need warmed up.
Yeah.
But yes, so first off, as I said, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. I just wanted to pick your brain about a few wee bits and pieces. First off, I wanted to get you to give us a wee bit of background on yourself and the fact that you are the known Irish whiskey historian.
Thank you very much. I write about whiskey, kind of with the right hand in an academic kind of capacity. I wrote my PhD thesis on the history of Irish distilling, and with the left hand in a kind of a whiskey writing kind of popular criticism kind of space, and they kind of meet in the middle as to what I think I do. I was trained in history. That was my undergrad. My history and medieval literature was kind of where I came from. Always thought I would kind of pursue that going forward, and then whiskey fell into my life. And then a stray bit of funding fell into my lap to do a thesis on the history of whiskey, but specifically the history of the material drink, because what history was out there was really the history of the business or the history of the industry. or the history of tax and revenue, but it wasn't really the history of, what people use and how they make it kind of stuff. And so then I jumped into that for 6 years. It knocked the wind out of me, but it's done now. And I've gone back to the kind of the whiskey for whiskey drinkers writing, but now with a shed load of information that I am delighted to be able to share. And thankfully along the road, I would have the opportunity to take some of that history and kind of apply it, because a lot of distilleries were interested in kind of recreating these recipes. Most centrally to the Thesis Boan distillery, but loads of people from Ecklenville to Redemond to Killowen, Pierce Lyons. I've done stuff with all of them, because they, Blackwater, because they expressed interest. And we were in this moment where the past suddenly was really cool again. So yeah, I didn't plan any of it really. It just happened in a strange sequence, but glad that it did.
Yeah, quite naturally. It just sort of snowballed.
Yeah. And Jesus, it is bloody hot. Sorry.
You're all right, mate. You're all right. Because just as you're saying, because I have a glass of port here.
Oh.
So obviously I have read it, and it's packed full of knowledge, especially for the basis of the history around whiskey, and obviously like for new whiskey drinkers, it's perfect to explain a bit more. Obviously for seasoned whiskey drinkers too, because just because you drink it doesn't mean you know it. So it's a great book, but I also have your thesis as we were talking about.
I apologize for that. They're written
as we were talking about Whiskey Live. I do have your.
Yeah, well, I suppose I should have mentioned the glass apart. So yeah, that was, in between those lives. So I about 11 years ago published that book. So it came out in 2015. It was the product of about 3 years of research or writing. So at that time, single pot still was a kind of still a very niche category on the kind of world bar shelf. It hadn't even been called single pot still all that long. It used to be called pure pot still. So even and I remember when I first started writing it, that was like John's Lane came out while I was doing it. We're in a completely different world now. So, it was a very a big kind of passion project at the time. It's obviously out of date now because there's so many more pot stills and so many distilleries. But I decided I didn't want to repeat it. I don't want to be chasing that book to the grave with new editions. I figured,
of course,
let that be a moment and have it stand on its own space and feed in that space and write something different. But yeah, it was a joy.
It's great as is, and as you say, there's no point going on to chase different editions of it because it's you've capped that chapter and you can move on. It has a lot of relevant knowledge that still carries to today, and it's certainly one I've looked to many a time for a wee bit more information on different things, because at the end of the day, we're never personally, I know, I never know everything about whiskey, so I just want to keep learning. And if I ever sort of have a query, yes, there's always Google everything else, but I do pick this back up to have a wee scan through just to give me a wee recap on things.
Well, thank you. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've looked at it in years. It's a strange, you kind of need to say goodbye to a book when you write it, because you'll never not look at it as if there's something you can fit. You always have that kind of authorial control, and you think, oh, I'm going to rewrite it. Oh, wait, I can't. It's in hard print. So, it's kind of like you need to take the gloves off and put the pie on the windowsill and, let someone take it. But, it's a strange, strange relationship with words, and I'm sure I'll feel the same about the new one as well,
Yeah, well, now you've mentioned the new project creator.
Hmm.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So, and actually, this bottle that I'm drinking is connected to that.
I
Oh,
thought that was the one.
yeah. So, Crater was kind of it almost happened by accident. So that is the new book. And currently in the works, doesn't exist yet. But I always knew that there would be another book, and I didn't want it to be a glass apart. Originally, it was going to be something much more like a glass apart than what this is, and sitting in the middle of the thesis, especially in the later stages, I it kind of came by accident. Like I started drafting outlines almost on another tab, when I get distracted from the thesis. It was
Yeah,
something else to do, and it was something that was about whiskey that wasn't as just deadpan as the thesis writing. A lot of Crater is drawn from information that was made possible by the thesis. It's totally indebted to the thesis, but it's kind of like taking the best bits and cutting them out and then mixing them with the contemporary distilling scene and what I had to kind of say about that. So it happened again almost out of the blue, and I'm kind of glad it began just so almost kind of wispily. I can't pinpoint the day I decided to write it. It just, by the
yeah,
time, it was always, I always knew that there was something going to be on the other side. um and then Marcus Lynham, the photographer, came on board, a good friend of mine, and someone very close to the whiskey industry himself in his design work. And so when there was that kind of partnership, one of the first things we did was we went off to Europe to look at these old kind of distilling manuscripts and some of these kind of stray bits of history. And that was kind of when I realized for the first time kind of what it was going to be like. But it has changed, as I've been writing. But the basic premise is, so its full title is Crater: Irish Whiskey Through the Histories of Its Tastes. And it was a way of saying, well, this is just one way of looking through a glass darkly, as it were, but through these kind of forgotten pasts, and through these ways of making the liquid, what can we say about the drink today? So it's a book that kind of pretends to be about the past, but is really about the present. So we're telling the history, but each chapter is kind of centered around producers. So it kind of hops between the past and modernity, a kind of a modernity slightly haunted by the past or by materials. So there's also, like, there's a chapter on peat where we walked around a bog squeezing turf for a day with a boggling restoration scientist, Mike Billett. Or we're going out to the White Oak Forest in America to kind of see that Quercus alba close up. So but it was all about, and obviously the name Crater is a kind of oldie fashioned nickname for whiskey, but it's one I really liked because obviously it's from Creature, and the idea of whiskey as a created thing, as something made by
yeah,
people out of stuff. Uh, the brand histories can take up a lot of the oxygen, and we kind of forget about it as a kind of a agro folk commodity. That this was made by humans out of stuff in their surroundings, and so Crater is really a desperate attempt to bring it back to first principles and to kind of tell the story of the drink through these lenses of kind of raw
yeah,
principles.
yeah. Instead of it, as you say, it was its own thing before every brand got a hold of it.
Yeah,
And maybe a different way of looking at it, as you've just said, it was its own sort of creature until every brand leased it.
yeah, and it became, you know, obviously, it is in the interest of any brand to tell a brand story, and but the air, what used to strike me was that a lot of what we call kind of knowledge in whiskey should really be kind of filed under kind of industry PR. It was these like top 10
Yeah,
learn this or that, but these factoids were ultimately about branding. Now, there's nothing evil. I think the marketing people get a a lot of flack, but I think most brand ambassadors want to tell an authentic story. They're good people. But it was how the history was even imagined, and that used to really get on me because again, my own background of hearing some of what passed for history in Irish whiskey history, and it was just so blatantly bad. It was not history. It was like a collection of kind of marketing pitches and fairy tales and this and that.
Yeah.
But you don't want to throw bricks either. You can become a crank and tell everyone they're wrong. Big whoop. But where's the joy in that? The other thing you can do is try and kind of present the research and the real historical sources as totally and freely as possible, and get people engaged and get people excited about this stuff. And I think a lot of people, and I felt this way with the thesis, was there was a lot of correcting to do, and it's not like I'm the voice of the heavens, but at least I did my homework and actually looked, and I know how to do research. I know how to go through archives and it's a skill set like any other skill set. You just learn how to do it and learn how to be thorough, and learn how to check things, not to take things at their word, to and learn what context is there. And it struck me, that there was a space for the book that could kind of move us past that in a kind way, in a way that reached out to the industry and to people, and give this to everyone. And and
present the facts without telling everyone they're wrong.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and some brands will hear you and they'll just ignore you and keep telling the spiel that they've invested in, and what are you going to do? You could die an unhappy man, railing against some branding deck, or you just move on.
Well, this is it. You can as I say, you can die on that hill of trying to fight against a brand that's just going to stick to their story that they think is the be all and end all, or you can present the facts, let them lie, and let people enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think we're in an odd place in Irish whiskey specifically, because there's an enormous past, but most of the distilleries are themselves quite young. And I think a lot of them, because they're young, have a great deal of freedom of kind of thematic mobility. They can choose to do things. They can pick something up very quickly. And if you say, well, here's an old recipe, they can, especially the small ones can jump on it. And that kind of mobility, you don't see it in Scotch whiskey. It's too, the whole industry is too established. It's too, and then you look at kind of the emergent kind of world whiskey, you do get the freedom if you're looking at, say, like whiskey made in New Zealand, but there isn't the history there. It's not the same kind of relationship, whereas Irish whiskey is kind of in this strange Venn diagram between the two. So it's a unique kind of moment, and I think there is a big, I think also because so many of the distilleries are new, there's a great thirst for authenticity, because if you've been around since, whatever, 1780, whatever date, you don't really have to prove that your heritage. It's there. It just physically exists.
Exactly.
Yeah. But if you're new, you kind of have to find a way in where you don't have to, but a lot of them feel a longing to, and maybe that is through history. Maybe that's through an engagement with materials in a sense, but there's a very, you can feel it in the air, that there's kind of longing for authenticity,
well, that's it exactly. And people love that authenticity, that transparency with people, with brands, and it's hard to, as you say, it's hard to go against someone like yourself who's done the research and then try and create a story when you only knew on the block. How do you say, oh, we've had this story ties back to 1842. It's like, no, it doesn't though.
Yeah. And you see it, some of them still try, like you get some, exactly.
And, be yourselves and present what you have, and as long as you're being authentic and transparent about it, people will listen. But if you're going to try and sell us a story that just doesn't stand up, it's hard to believe anything you say then.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, of course, like there's still paddywhackery in Irish whiskey labelling. There's still, all that crap is still there, but it comes often from weird enough, it doesn't really emit, for the most part, from the kind of core brands. It emits from like these recent arrivals buying. Now, there's nothing wrong with people, bonders and whatnot, buying liquid, but there are people who have kind of recently bought a parcel of liquid and have a branding idea, and they're on the go, and it's in that space. It's not all of them, but it's these kinds of, Johnny come latelys with a media pitch, and that's really what they've brought, is this kind of branding concept. They're not selling whiskey; they're selling a marketing concept, and you can see it still. Yeah, and you might find some dumb, oh, this whiskey celebrates my great great granddaddy who left this mash bill under a, well, they won't say mash bill, nothing liquid, but it'll whatever, he made whiskey under under a tree in Wicklow and blah blah blah. And
exactly. Well, he had a still under our back shed during the famine in 14. You're like,
and I think but I also think, in the age of the internet, in the age of social media, despite the fact that social media is, creates an awful lot of noise, it's still very easy to find stuff, even with the proliferation of misinformation. You can talk to communities, and someone will stick up on one of these Facebook groups or something, this story, and they'll be put right within a matter of seconds, and or heaven forbid, one of these brands try to advertise on these pages, and they go with, "Hey everybody, have you tried, my blah blah blah," and so there is, I think community is a big part of Irish whiskey. I think
definitely.
And it's happened almost accidentally. I think I was once talking to the Scottish distiller Graham Cool, who for a period was the head distiller at Dingle. And I asked him, I said, what's the difference between the Scotch industry and Irish industry for you? And one thing he said, well, the Scotch industry, these head distillers are kind of rolled out at events, and they give their presentation, and they're treated with a certain kind of augustness, and then you go back. So in Irish whiskey, nobody leaves you alone. Like, they have your phone number possibly, and the proximity is so close that there's this and probably a bit of a head wrecker for some of the producers, but it is part of this madness that, like, these characters, the Brendan Cartys, the Jarlath Watsons, whatever, they're as much a part of the consumer fabric as the consumers, and I hope we never lose that. And it's even among the the bigger brands, the brand ambassadors are part of this community. They know your first name when you meet them. They know when they go to these clubs. It's a very healthy kind of again fabric that's kind of developed around the revival.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, as you say, like, I say, with the producers and the head distillers, it's always like, if you're stuck for a question, you left the phone. Say, hey, I just want to check, was this right? Blah blah blah. And you, okay, well, actually, this is it. And and you're left on the phone, or I'm like, okay, would, like, say David from Shortcross, it's like texting him about coming on the podcast. It's like, oh no, it's not. You don't go through someone to get I'm just texting David. It's like,
exactly.
Oh, well, I'll get a message, see what he can do, or texting like Gareth Irvine from Copeland. It's like, okay, well, I want you on the pod. Oh, well, we're brand ambassadors, but yeah, no problem. It's like, no, I just go straight to him. You get you that close knit relationship where everyone sort of knows everyone, and it's a very great community to have, that they've no problem. It probably is a bit of a melt, as you say, for those guys, but they're never refuse to answer a question. They're always there to help.
there's no plexiglass wall, you know, in Irish whiskey, and possibly because the scene is so almost kind of fungal, you know, because it's so new. And another thing that Graham said to me, that on the other side of it, was he was talking about the Scotch industry, and he said, well, you know, I had a great, very Scottish perspective on it. He said, you know, in the Scotch industry, you kind of know your place. You know, you don't speak out of school. You know, there's nobody piping up about the SWA regulations. You know, there's nobody, you know, and you kind of wait for somebody to retire and then you get their job, you know. But the Irish whiskey industry is so bold, so flippant, so, you know, irreverent in that regard, because there's nobody to tell you to stop.
Exactly. And it's also, as you say, maybe because it's so new, but I think it's so reflective of where the world is today, and it's not as, okay, well, this is how it's been done traditionally. No, the rules don't apply that you have been playing for 50 years. We're playing by today's rules, and we're going with that.
Oh, totally. And there was that audacity. And I, you know, I really admire the only other, you know, I see that kind of audacity in world whiskey, because again, you know, if you're a Danish distiller, you can do what you like, because nobody's going to tell you that's not Danish whiskey. But again, because in Irish whiskey, it's kind of the accident. It's the youngest of the old distilling countries, you know. You probably get more severity out of, you know, Japan in terms of keeping line. You know, it's so odd, and also there's the, you know, the sense that, again, that the children, the amount of back chat that you get from the young distillers saying like, well, we don't agree with this, we don't, you know, is somewhat striking. Now, I do think, you know, I don't want to position it as like the young against the old, because I think there's been a lot of experimentation from the core old guard distilleries, but there also aren't that many of them. You know, it wasn't like there were 100 old distilleries.
Well, this did 20 years ago. There wasn't the numbers that there is now.
Yeah, and again, like we're all kind of, you know, it's a small island, it's a small industry. You know, you bump into people. You can't, you know, it's you want to not hold grudges. People talk, you know, even if they disagree.
Exactly.
You know,
and at the end of the day, as we've said, it's for us, it's a new industry. We've hit new heights with it, but we're all still finding our place.
Totally. It's a very exciting time. I think it's a very big-hearted time in Irish whiskey. You know, I think a lot of people, I think that goes back to that sincerity, but I also think it goes back to that proximity to the community. I think there's a community within the distilling side of things themselves, you know, but it's great, you know. It's no better whiskey scene to be in my humble opinion. It's
no, I have to agree. Definitely. You know, it's good to see the brands, they're competitors but not enemies.
Yeah,
that's a great thing, you know. And when you see different brands collaborating at different events or showing up for their neighbors' events, it's lovely to see.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. The fact that they go to each other's stuff is wonderful, you know. That there is that camaraderie, there is that, and it's not just out of formality. There's like a genuine interest, you know. It's great. And I honestly think, obviously there's a lot of turmoil in the world at the moment, in, you know, the drinks industry at large. You know, the kind of the original giddiness has worn off a bit in terms of sales, but the community is resilient. You know, it's great to see. You know, it has only gotten stronger. You know, oh, it is a bloody hot day. It's bloody soft drinking this. I might have to switch drams. Something. I think smoke in the sweltering heat might.
I'm not envious of smoking the sweltering heat.
Well, this is also, this was my runner-up, so and probably more on topic if we were talking about the thesis, but this is a bottling that was done for the Whiskey Exchange in London of the Boan distillery project that was part of the thesis. But it's also, because it's in sherry, they've given it this kind of matador up at the top. So I can, in this weather, I can kind of pretend, you know, I wouldn't last 5 seconds in a bull ring, but you know, I can pretend my own little kind of Hemingway moment.
Yes.
But this would be an example. It's like, you know, sherry cask. This was 30% oats, 40% unmalted barley, and 30% malted barley. So a big wallop of raw barley. It is very Irish, but again, that oats was something that had been completely lost. So this, in one sense, a very classical Irish whiskey, pot still, sherry cask, you know, but in the other, exotic. But we're in that paradox where, like, once upon a time, that was not exotic at all. But because we lost it, it's exotic again.
Yes.
You know?
It's coming around as the new kid on the block, which actually isn't the new kid.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's a strange, you know, the way I used to describe it was, you know, when you see a picture of, like, say, like one generation in your family before you knew them, like your great grandparents, and they kind of look like your family. You know, like you see some, especially, you know, and or your grandparents when they were young and you didn't know them, that kind of stuff. But you can see the features, and you know, the photo might be in sepia or something, but you know, there's a weird kind of these people look like my parents. They look, you know, this is odd. There's something strikingly familiar, you know, and for me, a lot of these old mash bills are like that. They're still pot still, they're still oily, they're still spicy, they're still very Irish, but there's something a little odd, you know. But then again, to find those tastes, you have to look back to whiskeys from the 60s, and you know, and there you're talking about, you know, they were usually kind of kicking around the age of 7, so we're not quite there yet. And there were other things going on that were different then. You know, obviously the direct flame stills and the sherry casks were different, and blah blah blah. The bourbon casks hadn't really taken over in the way that they are now the kind of bedrock of the industry. But yeah, so again, as you say, the new kid on the block. It's not really new at all.
Well, on the topic of the historic mash bills, this was my #1 whiskey of the year last year.
Very good. Is that the 4.1 or the 4.2? I can't see.
4.1.
4.1. So that is actually the same mash bill that I'm drinking here. So this was the Whiskey Exchange bottling, and that Polaris were the same. They were different casks, obviously, but they came from the same 30% oats mash bill. So a very close cousin. The Two Stacks one was stronger. Wouldn't you know it, London, they cut it down to 52%. Couldn't, whereas I think that Polaris is, yeah, exactly. They don't have quite the Newry resilience, you know.
Yeah, and the fact that the reason is I'm massively into my Oloroso finished whiskies, and the fact this was full maturation in an Oloroso hogshead just killed it for me. It absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, I think that, I'm sorry. Have I lost you?
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, you froze there a second.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, again, and you know, Oloroso is such a close part of Irish whiskey for so long, you know, or sherry in general. That and unlike some of these mash bills, the sherry stayed with us, you know. Now it became more of a specialty thing than, you know, once upon a time it was a much more central, you know. But it's still, you know, it's very difficult, you know, when you think of like the kind of the Old Testament of Irish whiskey, not to picture that glass being sherry maturation. You know, that it runs so deep in the psyche of what we think whiskey is, you know. Which is odd, because a bourbon barrel just held a different form of whiskey beforehand. If anything, it's the more whiskey kind of, but it just runs so so deep in the idea of old school flavors.
Yeah.
You know,
It just encaptures everything that old Irish whiskey probably was, you know, is.
mm.
But yeah, as I say, this was my number one whiskey a year. And see, because I don't have that much left, I actually had to search and get myself a couple wee backup tins. So the rest of this actually lives up under our bed, so I don't finish it.
Jeez.
But I keep the. I know I love it so much. So then I keep the backup tins for if I really feel like I need it.
So if anyone ever breaks
Just
in, you know, watch out, or I'll hit you with a vintage mash bill under the bed. Last line of defense.
no, that's what the baseball bat's for. Yeah. So where am I? I'm trying to find. I don't know. I would love to have it again, but I think it's just too warm of a night for it. It's a fucking nightmare.
No worries.
Okay. Have a wee Crawley gift set. Go open one of
Oh,
these. So on the upcoming, I know that you have obviously you've laid down some vintage mash bills. What is going, if you can tell me, what is going to be the next one released?
yeah. So, well, when I did the project with Boan, the kind of the the proposal was that the cast would be sold off, uh, so that it was made clear to the industry that we weren't doing just Boan R&D. This was meant to be an academic project, because a big part of that was we laid down 10 historic mash bills, and then we had a blind panel, and it was made of 27 blenders and distillers from across the Irish whiskey industry, and some Scots in there as well, and to go with that pitch to those distilleries. And it was amazing the amount of free labor, love, and support we got from the industry was jaw dropping. It was really moving to me, anyway. People who volunteered their time, and I said, well, look, Boan made it because somebody had to make it, but this collective kind of gastro heritage belongs to you all, and all this information will be free. It will all be on the thesis, and thankfully now the thesis is done. It is freely available. It's a free download on if you Google my name and PhD, you'll find the page immediately. It's college website, and you can download the thing, in the space of 2 minutes. But anyway, part of that proposal was that those casks would be, so for instance, like they were sold to, like, for instance, Celtic Whiskey Shop in Dublin own a rake of them. So some of the Bonders, Louise McGuan out in Clare, Dahi down in WD O'Connell, the lads in Newry and Two Stacks. So they're scattered around in a lot of whiskey clubs, the Cork Whiskey Society, the Irish Whiskey Society, the Waterford. They're scattered around, and then a number of pubs, Dick Mack's, Palace. I don't want to start naming too many, because then I'll forget people, and then it'll look like I'm sliding people. But they're spread around. So I have absolutely feck all control over which of them come out when. Like I certainly didn't tell Two Stacks to put this out, or the Whiskey Exchange, this. So they're coming out. My big relief was actually, because the thesis was finished September of last year. My big fear was they were all going to start coming out before I was done, and I wouldn't be finished yet, and it would all be kind of embarrassing. This is still going on. But and then obviously we use one of them in Creator as a kind of a cask share kind of fundraising. So that's one of the few that's like publicly known about. But the rest, I have absolutely no control. I'm not the last person to find out, but certainly not the first. So they're and great to see. You know, I am delighted. And a few of them have come out with Celtic Whiskey Shop already, kind of under the radar. They've had some bottlings for their festivals that were drawn from the vintage mash bills. Again, the Whiskey Exchange. There's now 2 out from 2 stacks. So they're in the bloodstream, you know.
Yeah.
And again, you know, long may that continue. I'm delighted to see them kind of pop up, you know.
Yeah. So, I'd say that was what was the first one from 2 stacks was 4.1, and was the 4.2.
Yeah. So this here, Polaris Rum and PX Vintage Mash Bill number 6, 4.2. So that's another one done by the lads. So that was in a rum cask that they then moved to a PX cask, whereas the one you have is the full sherry maturation. This was in a and PX Spinola, which is a very particular bodega. So Spinola, if you're ever down in Jerez, Spinola are kind of the specialists in PX in Jerez. A lot of people don't actually know that most PX sherry, oddly enough, is not made in Jerez. 99% of it is made in Montilla, which is the region just to the north of Jerez. Now that Montillan fortified wine, if it's sent down to Jerez, becomes sherry, and that's kind of how the thing works. You know, functionally all PX comes from outside the sherry triangle, but the exception, the big glaring exception, are Spinola, who are in Jerez and kind of do this but they're quite odd, you know, as a production. So they're quite kind of odd casks. But you know, they're I've even had it said to me that Spinola is not really sherry. It's kind of, you know, its own little oddity within the fortified wine world. And that was said to me in a very passionate tone of conviction by a man from Andalusia. So I'm inclined to take him at his word. But he, you know, again, the casks that are out there were in their starting casks, and people can do what they like with them after that. So again, like this had been in a rum cask, and then the lads in Newry decided to move it over to the other. And then Boann have put some of them out themselves, because they kept one of each mash in one of each cask type, and they do these solstice releases, and they've released a couple. So they're out there in the bloodstream, you know. And I suspect in the coming years there'll be more leaking out. Now that they were all distilled at the same time, so
yeah,
they're all about 5.5 years old now. So I think now that we're coming close to like the 7-year mark, you can start seeing a lot more, you know, people kind of.
So we just have to keep an eye out.
Yeah, you know.
Great. There's probably quite a few I have to get my hands on.
Yeah, I certainly have no intention of keeping up with them all, you know. But
surely you should get a bottle from each.
Well, proper order. I think this is, you know, this conversation is finally, you know, hitting some real hard topics of interest. I think I'm owed.
We'll clip this and put it out and say, come on, Fionnán is owed a bottle of each of your mash bills here.
Wow.
So on to the looming subject that has been over out the last couple of weeks on the Irish whiskey technical file.
Oh boy. Oh, geez, it's getting even hotter in here than it was.
Listen, if there's anyone I'm going to ask, it's going to be you.
No problem.
So I read up on the supposed amended changes. Would you have any suggestions of things that should be changed along with those? Have you read the amended changes?
Yes. Well, when it comes to the pot still one, I mean, I wrote them. You know, the 30% oat, wheat, and rye is straight out of the thesis. And I was very lucky that, you know, and there were people in the Irish Whiskey Association, you know, the likes of John Quinn, of David Boyd Armstrong, people quite close to that process, who really were keen to kind of bring me into the tent and have the research be a part of that process. And the same thing goes for Caroline Madigan and all the people within the Miriam Mooney Ahern, all the people within the process there. And then same from the Guild, you know, and I know the Guild guys very well. So, you know, there was a very open hand. And if you look at the submissions that are on there, I can't get away from it. The thesis, my name is dripping through the thing on both of them, to the point where, you know, I will be submitting myself on behalf of the thesis directly. Now that'll be quite a plain spoken submission. It'll just be, here's the PhD in full, and you know, it can be found here and blah blah blah. But so that one is quite close to me. But I, you know, like, look, when I say I wrote it, I didn't write it. I just took it from the history that was there. It's history wrote it. You know, if it would be honest, it was Andrew Jemison who wrote it. You know, and that idea of 30% other stuff you can find. You know, and actually, there's a white paper in that IWA submission. I think it's called Appendix 2, and that's mine, straight out of the research. But in that, I was explaining the logic behind this and saying, well, if you go back to the 1908 Royal Commission, the quote unquote "What is Whiskey" trial, which was really the first time a kind of, you know, government inquiry tried to get its head around what was whiskey. You know, a number of very prominent Irish distillers testify, Andrew Jemison, James Talbot Power, the gang. I was thinking, well, okay, this is their definition. So, you know, never mind me. I just put on the, you know, gloves and found it, but this is it. You know, if we're going to say we have a past, this is our past, you know, and it fits all the, and by making it oats. So the current file says up to 5% other, which fits nothing. It doesn't really qualify any of the old mashes. Not even the ones, there's a few that come close, but not really. But it also, you know, I think the legitimate fear that some people had early on was, well, if we open the door, the flood will come in and it won't taste like Irish pot still anymore. And so the proposal to expand it to 30%, but make that 30% specifically oats, wheat, or rye, the three traditional grains, the three historical grains, kind of answer that question from both sides. And it's also, there's a kind of a musicality around it, because when you have this 30-30-30 concept, none of the adjuncts can get bigger than malt or raw barley. You know, in fact, the three of them combined can't be higher. You know, they're capped at 30. So they will always be minor grains.
Exactly. You can't take away that element of pot still that is significant to Irish.
Exactly. There'll always be a 70% sameness, you know, threshold. And that's only assuming people even push it to 30%, you know. And I've said to people, look, just because you have 30% doesn't mean you have to take it. It just means you don't have to settle for 5, you know, and that there's any number of space in between. And it also, you know, like your typical old school, like, again, this mash that I was drinking now, that Polaris is 30% oats, and that's a very common old mash. But you see a lot of oats. Of the three other grains is definitely the one that has the longest and the biggest history. The other two are much smaller. We had a kind of a moment, but they were always there, and they're kind of kicking around, you know. And this kind of allows for that kind of breadth and that space, while stopping it from being like a flood of maize or something, you know. And you can see that in the old and all of this stuff is still allowable in Irish whiskey. Like, that's the great joke. You can do anything you like, not anything you like, but, you know, these old recipes and more, and call it Irish whiskey. And that's important too. But it's almost like, you know, and GIs are used, for example, to regulate cheese, to regulate all kinds of food and drink products. And it'd be like, well, the difference between being able to call it Italian cheese versus call it, you know, Parmigiano Reggiano. You know, it is important that there be freedom, but it also be important that if you are going to protect a heritage food product, you protect it correctly, you know. But if you were just going to say, like, we are only using the Parmesan made by this, you know, whatever company since the 90s, you know, I could see a lot of anger from someone with some sort of aged, you know, archaic method feeling like they've been written out of history. But it's similarly, it's important to kind of treat these things as ultimately for me, the file, and I think the file changes are very positive. If you look at the Guild submission and the IWA submission, they don't agree on all topics. They have different proposals, but on pot still they're identical, and it was a great vote of confidence. I felt that when they went in, like down to the comma, up to 30% oat, sweet or rye, malted or unmalted. It's the exact same submission in both. And then again, there are other topics where I'm sure there'll be debate, but they are, and in some of the other proposals, they're close as well. There isn't a huge amount of acrimony, but obviously now the things that are different, I'm sure there are people who are very upset that they're different and wouldn't want me to speak lightly of them. But certainly for most of the public, the kind of the file change that's getting all the attention and the limelight is the pot still thing, and that is a joint proposal.
Yeah, and as you said, there is, if you're going to protect something as a GI indicator and say we have this history, protect it correctly and honor the history that we have, because as you say, you didn't write it. You just found it and brought it to light. You have the facts and you're just showing them.
I'm little more than the waiter in all this. The kitchen the kitchen existed from essentially the birth of the 18th century up to the 1970s. I'm just again a glorified member of the wait staff, but at least I went and looked, and and it was amazing to me that like some of this stuff, now some of it was found in obscure places, like American import records or something you'd really kind of have to look, but some of it was shockingly easy. Like I remember walking to the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland and just scrolling down the index and like Cumber, Dunvilles, blah, 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 and being kind of, holy crap, has no one ever just walked in here and looked, And, now the Cumber one was more difficult than that because it turned out the boxes were missing, and but that was a kind of a surprise difficulty that they didn't know where they were, and they were kind of off site and blah blah blah. And then I found the stuff, and then I went back, and they were missing again. And so I don't know, but I took images while I was there, and obviously like that one was Ecklenville were very keen to, they have, because obviously they call all their pots still Old Cumber, but they have an unreleased Old Cumber mash bill version of the Old Cumber coming up the pipelines. That was based. So there'd be an example, like the Bowan thing was a kind of a theoretical spread, whereas that was a very specific case study of like a contemporary distiller that was emotionally and thematically invested in a brand that could, I was able to kind of say, look, this has been of value to an entrepreneurial young distillery that can take this and draw inspiration from it, and give them a connection to that past, because obviously they're using the name. So there's an example of a mash bill being a kind of a link of sincerity, saying, well, we're not just free riding off of an old brand. We do feel connected to this, and there's something we intend to do to express that,
of course. And can I ask what office it was you went into in Northern Ireland to find these references?
Oh, the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland. It's right on the riverfront. It's by the Titanic Centre. And it's a public resource. There's nothing like, and actually both Prony and its equivalent in Dublin, the NLI, they're public access. It takes 5 minutes to get a reader's card. They love helping people. They couldn't be more helpful.
I might have to take a wee trip down.
It's astonishingly easy, and I've brought people in there for like, I brought when he was still with Ecklenville, I brought Graham Miller into Prony to have a look at it, and and I brought Sarah Kennedy when she was with McConnell's to look at some of the McConnell stuff. and they all come out with the same thing, like, wow, this was surprisingly easy. You know,
Yeah.
there's nobody,
Yeah.
there's no,
It's
you know,
not hidden in a vault somewhere.
no, you know, and again,
Absolutely.
it's
And
it's
and
and that was the thing for me, was all hiding in plain sight. You know, that it was all kind of such low hanging fruit. I felt almost guilty about, you know, taking credit for any of it, because, you know, it wasn't difficult. You know.
but it's not difficult when it's not difficult until someone does it.
Yeah, then it's kind of seems,
Do you
why
know?
didn't we do this decades ago?
It
You know.
exactly. It's if it takes some once it's done, someone will say, "Oh well, sure, we could have done that years ago, but you didn't." It's not difficult now that you've done it, and you can lay the groundwork for anyone coming after you to say, "Hey, just like I've just asked, hey, if you want to look for this, it's here. If you want to see this, it's there."
Mm.
But to do that initial mapping of where the things are and how we see them, that's the difficult part. It's not difficult once it's done.
Yeah, and like, look, it's again, archive research is kind of like going fishing. You can spend a whole day and get nothing, and it can be really frustrating. And then you can go in and within 5 minutes hit some amazing archive, you know, and so I always balance it to myself, saying, well, you know, the time is spent. You know, like, I remember I thought I had it in my head when I was in when I was in Proning, was in Public Records Office in Northern Ireland. I had in my head that milling uh, archives were going to be the key, that I would find all this stuff through mills. And I spent a week and found fuck all through the history of mills. And, you know, and that was a wrong idea on my part, that there would be any, because I thought the mills will have some thing about,
Uh,
like, this grain is
the,
sent to a distillery,
the
this is this,
Northern
this is that.
Ireland, mills, linen, fucking, it'll be there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is what I was thinking. Geez, if there's a city that loves mills, you know, this is, you know, this is where I'm going to find this. And like, I did find records of processing grains. They just didn't say where they were going, so it was useless to working on a mash bill, you know.
Yeah.
The So yeah, it was, you know, but you try everything, and then you do something else, and suddenly it's, or like, for instance, on a separate thing, there was I decided to look at the FDA. And so in America, the Food and Drug Administration was actually founded around alcohol. So it was a guy, Wiley, that really set up the predecessor to the FDA. But this guy, Dr. Wiley, they even call the first kind of major Food and Protection Act in the US, Dr. Wiley's law. But he was really interested in whiskey in an American context, and their equivalent to that Royal Commission, the American version of the What is Whiskey trial, happened within 5 years of the kind of, you know, the London one. But I looked at the FDA, and they had records of Irish whiskey being imported to America. And the FDA didn't give a flying fuck what your secret mash bill is. They wanted to know exactly what you used to make it and in what proportions, you know, and that kind of paranoia was where, and so I found a number of them through there, of like this early American FDA. Now the FDA doesn't really mind, because there's the understanding, well, it's ethanol, it's this, it's that. But at the time, there was a lot of anxiety about what are people using to make things, and it was very much tell us what's in this, and before you're entering the country, you know. And so that turned out to be a success. But it's like a fishing expedition. You never know, you know. And that's what really took the time rather than the writing, you know.
Yeah. It's well, that's you know, once you have it's getting the pieces. Once you have the pieces together, it'd be easier to put them in order. But it's getting them pieces and then aligning them.
Totally.
And that's why sometimes you have to fish with dynamite.
Well, that's what we're doing with this technical file legislation. Now we've got the dynamite.
Now we've got it.
The fishing process. You know.
Another one I was reading, obviously going through the amended stuff for the technical file, about the peated pot still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one where like you can find peat. I mean, first of all, like peat itself was kind of written out of the history of Irish whiskey in a way that is kind of startling. Um, you know, considering that this island is basically a floating bog, you know, and it's if you look at excise reports from the 19th century, a lot really the defining smell of poaching was smoky. You know, you have these great reports where excise officers claim to be able to confiscate on smell alone, and they say, well, the Parliament whiskey is unsmoky or doesn't have this smoky character. So that illicit stuff seems to have been smoky as all hell, which stands to reason. You know, like you look when it comes down when you take the romance out of it. You know, one of the kind of quirks. You know, if you look at like Irish whiskey history and Scottish whiskey history, there's an awful lot of commonality, but some of the differences come less from the kind of history of something just happening versus history of kind of excise or revenue handling. And what happened in Scotland was they took essentially a boom in illicit distilling, largely in the Highlands and the West Coast, actually, and obviously in the Northeast, in and around what's now Speyside, and kind of coaxed it into legitimacy, you know. And the Scottish whiskey industry goes on about this: licenses encouraged and blah blah blah. And there's always the question, like, why was that never done in Donegal? Why isn't Donegal the like Islay of Irish whiskey? And there's a number of reasons you could point to. You know, partly the success of the Irish kind of urban distilling industry preempted that, partly just a different kind of landlordism and what was in, you know, how it all played out. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But if you look at, especially in Ulster, distilleries like Coleraine and ding, 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 Bushmills, old 1820s ads for Bushmills without, you know, pause. You can see them. They're on the British Newspaper Archive. And they all say that classic Bushmills peat flavored taste. They couldn't be more explicit about it. You know, that classic Bushmills peat taste. And it's all there. And you'd be a long time explaining to anyone, we're not for the merciful existence of proof that this is there. And similarly, like, you know, even the pot still stuff probably would have been less peaty because less of it is malt in the first place. So even if you're using peated malt, if the peated malt is 30% of the mash, it's not going to taste the same as 100% peated malt, but it's there, it pops up. And then the really weird part, the part that really kind of thrills me, is that when you look at the excise reports and they're talking about the illicit distilling and the quote unquote poaching distillers, and there's one great one where there's a guy, Michael Donovan, who was a Cork chemist. He was a professor at what then would have been Queen's College Cork, what's now UCC. But he goes up to what he calls the most mountainous and northern parts of Ireland, famous for poaching. So that means one of two things. It either means Inishowen or possibly it means the Glens of Antrim. But in either case, he describes the poaching that they're making. And he says some poaching distillers use pure malt, he says, but many use a mixture of 3 bags of peat smoked malt and 1 bag of unmalted barley. And you think, hold on. First of all, these guys aren't paying any ruddy tax to anyone. So that whole malt tax story goes out the window. And then you have, you know, if you adjust that by 75-25, if you tweak that to 70-30, that's compliant with the modern proposal, you know, with modern pot still. So actually, Two Stacks commissioned Sleeve League to do a run of that mash on the back of this document. So it is there. You can see it floating around. So there is space, you know, and I don't see any reason it should be prohibited. Certainly, you know. So again, and what's odd is, you know, part of the problem with the file is that it's not just that parts are wrong; it's that the file is written in a very kind of lackadaisical or almost kind of romantic way. So if you look at the Irish Whiskey Technical File, it has phrases where it says like traditionally aged in dark dunnage warehouses. And you think, what the hell is this? This is a government document. You're supposed to tell you what you
Yes.
can and can't do, not like,
Yes.
and there may be moss growing on the side, and the
I
distiller
know
may be wearing a straw hat.
exactly. Like not like you're describing a story that you're telling your children.
Yeah. And so what it actually says is Irish pot still whiskey is currently non-peated. What the hell does that mean? Currently, so a few people have already taken that to task, saying like, is that even legally
Yeah.
binding as it is? So a few distilleries have already done peated pot still on the and actually have been in kind of concert with the revenue about being allowed to. So like, for instance, Pierce Lyons do have peated pot still maturing away. Obviously Sleeve League have a ton of peated pot still. Their peated malt is out now, but I believe their peated pot still is not far behind. Now that pot still is peated, but it's also 20% oats. So it's still not pot still until the file changes, regardless of how you read the peated thing. But and that's it. It's like there's a lot of producers. I know a number of them were very vocal and very strong about making noise. And Blackwater, Boan, Kilo, and but there's a lot behind the scenes that have kind of quietly, done stuff as well.
Yeah.
And there's more of it out there. You were mentioning Crawley. Crawley have been doing, non-GI pot stuff for a while now.
Yeah.
So it's in the bloodstream, and I think I think the peated thing is if you want to find the history. Now it's not as strikingly obvious as the grains thing. The grains thing is like such an historical insult. Like the fact that you take a modern bottle, you take a bottle of 1960s Redbreast, and if the truth were known, it is not pot still by the modern definition at all. It's got oats, wheat, and rye in it. But the peated one, you have to look a little further back to find that stuff. But it is there. But even in principle, I don't see any reason why it should be banned. I think there's also like there's a great, when you're talking about tradition, I think tradition, especially in the sense of art or music or food, is really the idea of archive, that you don't go back, and if you're any good at painting, you wouldn't go back and say, I want to paint like Michelangelo. You paint like yourself, but you draw inspiration from Michelangelo, whatever. You look at any great cultural activity, and it's all about sincere engagement with the past. And okay, that's all in a very, very broad term. But even like when we're talking closer to food and drink, there's a number of people talking about, you talk about Italian cuisine, French cuisine, they move on, but they draw from the past. Now, what I'd love to see Irish whiskey do is dispense with all the bollocks and the bullshit and the blarney, which clotted up the atmosphere, in various ways. And again, it's not that everyone was spouting blarney, but it was there. It is out there still. But also, and I think this applies to a lot more people and a lot more brands in Irish whiskey, is what I'd love to see the end of is the unknowingness, because I think a lot of people, they just sincerely didn't know. And we don't, and we're in this position of rediscovery, of finding out. I had this conversation with Dave Mulligan about Putchin, and he was going on a podcast himself, and he was talking about the past, and he said, look, we're only finding out, we don't is that wonderful phrase, we don't know ourselves, and I think what I'd love to see the back of is that unknowingness, because I think equipped with the information, with the history, most brand ambassadors, most distillers are in good faith, and they're not all obliged to talk about the past in the first place. If they want to make whatever they want to, there should be nothing stopping them either. But if we are talking about heritage categories, then this all becomes very prescient, but there should be that space within, and that was the thing with the oats, wheat, and rye up to 30%. You can mold your own mash bill, and that was one thing I was trying to kind of impress with the stuff we did with Boan, is we're not wearing tri-cornered hats and recreating ye old whiskey. It's about those mashes in a contemporary distillery setting, and how, because there's so many things that are different, again, like we're using modern yeast rather than a bloody barm out of a bakery, or
Yeah,
straight Guinness yeast, which is what a lot of them used to use in Dublin.
exactly. Modern equipment, well, highly filtered water.
Yeah, modern
these
barrels,
very technical things that
bourbon
we do now.
barrels, anything, totally. So it's about engaging with the past, and I feel very sincerely about that. And I think people should have the freedom to make that engagement, but to make it a sincere engagement,
Yeah,
and that's what I
no,
think
I
is the next.
completely agree. Is as you say, is that history is as you have found and brought to light. That's how things were done, and we should be taking inspiration from those
Mm,
and bringing that into the modern setting.
totally. Um, yeah, and again, the piece, and there's other proposals there. Obviously, those are the two that are about pot still, but I see them as
Yeah,
kind of interlinked.
yeah. Oh, of course. Because there's a couple other wee ones that I had sort of looked at. Obviously, there's well, I'm going to say half silly things like the terms of calling pasta large and the plural setting of pot stills instead of pot still.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of cosmetic, suggestions.
Yes.
And that's grand, like while no one is going to touch this file for a very, very long time afterwards, I suspect. Like it was a chore
Yeah.
getting into this. Again, these liquids are 5.5 years old, and that initial argument began even earlier, and this has all gone at a glacial pace, even with the IWA on side, with the guild on side, with these submissions. You know, so I don't. Some of these submissions may seem petty, like when we're talking about kind of semantic stuff, but at the same time, like, why the hell not?
Well,
Again,
this is it. This is what I'm going to say is, there's those really technical things that we're talking about the pastel, ratios and the peated pastel, and then you talk about things that contribute sort of cosmetically, but why we're here, let's get them right.
yeah, exactly. Who's going to ever touch this again? And
Exactly
again,
why the
I don't
arguments there.
envy that person if they ever choose to. I certainly have no intention of going near it with a barge pole again.
Yeah, of course. But as you say, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, totally. And again, like,
People.
look, I can't wait for it to be in the rear view mirror. I when I wake up in the morning and I have my first sip of coffee, it is not the technical file that starts my day. It is not the bird song in my life. The excitement for me is ultimately in the producers themselves, in the distillates, and in the if we can, and if we can put this language stuff behind us, I'll be delighted never to mention it again. I derive no joy from raiding against the man in this way. I would like to see Irish whiskey move kind of together in a positive direction toward greener pastures, but I really do like that it happened for all that, because I think it really was a sign of spunk and of life in the industry. Like, looking back at it, that this was there and there was the kind of, the get up and goness to say this is wrong and blah, blah, blah. And I think it says something about us as an industry and as a scene that's very healthy. That there was that integrity as well, and that honesty, that we weren't just spitting yarns about, oh, this is pot still, this is that, that there was kind of more in us, again, but at the same time, it was an absolute chore, and one that I don't envy anybody seeking to repeat.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm just on the same page as you. I'll be happy. Obviously, I don't really take any part in it, but I'll be happy to see it in the rear view to get things aligned because I think it will benefit everyone. Um, but also I am happy to have a conversation about it, but I don't envy anyone doing anything for it.
Yeah, no, and at the same time, like this 10-week consultation is open. Anybody can respond. You know, it's all public, so you have to be comfortable with your name or your username or however it's handled being associated with a quote. But I would encourage people. Now, not everyone. I'm not in the business of telling anybody how to think. I encourage everyone to read the proposals themselves. Obviously, I have, you know, very obvious skin in the game, and I feel very strongly about it. And I would definitely be an advocate for the pot still file changing. But I think the government could do with hearing from consumers. I think it could do with hearing, because if it's not
Yeah.
us, it'll be some randomer. It'll be, some who knows. You know, you never know who responds to these things, and it could be someone
Yeah.
who isn't informed, or who, like, I saw some of the stuff online from influencers outside of Ireland, comments replying to them, and they were saying, well, Irish whiskey, if Irish whiskey changes, it might lose its heritage. And they don't even know enough to know that this is a reclamation of heritage. This was driven,
Exactly.
but because they're not equipped with that information, it's a natural take. Think, oh, this is probably some greasing of the edges of Irish whiskey to allow a little lucre to pass hands, or cheapen the process. And
Yeah.
and it's kind of are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a bit of Dunning-Kruger. So for your listeners, it's like Dunning-Kruger is like when you don't have enough knowledge about something to know where your take fits into the big scheme of things, so you become really confident. Like, I watched a television program on the solar system, and now think I'm an expert. But if I was an actual
I,
astrophysicist, I would know where,
I,
like, Stephen Hawking sits and where I sit.
yeah.
Where.
I've watched a documentary on Netflix now. I'm near deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, exactly. And so it becomes, like, there's a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily know even enough about. Now, this is in astrophysics. It's much easier to fucking get your head around pot still mashbills, but in an utterly goodwill sense, they just aren't presented with enough information to know what is even going on, and someone might have a loud take. And I think it's
Yeah.
important for the community to, and even if you disagree with me, I would still encourage people to post. I believe in the democratic process deeply.
Well,
Um,
I definitely think more people. Obviously, I don't know how many people have submitted suggestions so far, but I would definitely agree that anyone who has any thoughts to put their suggestions in, because I do feel that in this sort of circumstance, it's almost no answers, no answer, no question is a wrong question to be asking. Yes, it can be ignored, it can be shot down, but it's worth putting your thoughts forward.
totally, and again, it's if it's not us, who is this for, if not
Yeah,
for the consumers? And I can speak to history. I can certainly speak to we did again the sensory panel about the distillates that have been done to date, or at least in that particular context. But it was also the sense of, like, back to what we were talking about earlier with that proximity between distillers and community in Ireland. I think that's one of the most vital parts of the whole Irish whiskey scene. I really, really do, because it's not like that in American whiskey. It's not like that in Scotch whiskey. It's not, it's certainly not that way in, wine, or so many other. Maybe it's like that in some other beverages that I don't know. But it for me, it's a unique sense of a fabric of, as you said, that you could pick up the phone and give, Gareth or David, or, some distillery owner a call, and that they'd answer you in good faith. It's amazing. We're amazingly blessed with this stuff. I feel very strongly about, and there was that sense even when the file, was when the technical committee of the IWA was meeting, and they, and John Quinn, who was president at the time, was calling me every day and saying, look, I want to know as much about the history of pot still whiskey as anybody in the room. Give me everything. And there is that sincerity. And again, it was a chore, but I'm glad that it happened for that reason too, that it really did show a sincerity in the industry as well, of intent,
Exactly. And that's exactly it. It's the intent for to be putting these things forward to benefit everyone, and especially the consumers, because as it goes, it's, you have the producers with sort of their hands tied here of what you can or can't do, and who does it benefit?
Yeah, and keep in mind the
Doesn't
producers.
benefit anyone when you have people like Brendan, who is an absolute genius and is coming out with these amazing mash bills of while fermentation and stuff, and it's coming out as contemporary pasta. And it's like, well, it should be just included in the technical file, because this is the way things were.
Totally. And I'll give you one historical point that I don't think I've made enough of to date. It's in the thesis quite heavily, but it's in such kind of, again, deadpan language that
I'll get there.
But a big argument in the thesis. So, and again, Irish whiskey history used to be told in these kinds of less history in these kinds of just so stories. And a lot of them on investigation turn out not to be true. So, like, one story we always heard about pot still was, there was a malt tax and we invented pot still to like foil the revenue. And I remember thinking, like, the spidey senses in the historian is going on thinking like, this sounds like bullshit, and it probably is. This is the revenue. They don't fuck about. They'll get their money from you.
Yeah.
And true enough, it was nonsense. And I went up into the bloody Houses of Parliament archive and read the Irish malt tax, and sure enough, in the bloody the whole thing is ludicrous, because the way the actual malt tax worked was you were taxed on malt at the start, and then once you declared spirit, you got the money back. So the idea was like, it was basically to stop distillers from kind of cooking off the books. So like running liquid and not declaring it. So you'd be stuck with a tax on the malt at the start. But then once you did it, you got the money back. And so this doesn't make any bloody sense. And then within that, now that didn't last forever. Then it actually did become a tax. But within that, they then prohibited the use of unmalted barley or unmalted grain at all, trying to get everyone to make malt whiskey. And then there was the Act of Union, and it didn't fucking matter, because then we're back under the same system. There's a whole effort to have a joint excise system anyway. So all this stuff goes out the window. So it's just bad history that you think like this is. And then if you look at the history of Irish distilling, they're using raw barley 100 years before the malt tax even happens. So none of this. So I knew early on that, okay, well, this is nonsense. This is just not history. And then the malt tax was done away with anyway.
Well, people are still spinning that.
Yeah, but again, like, it's easy to, like, again, throw the bricks, but you think, well, okay, well, if it wasn't this, what was it? And if I could like boil down the argument that I made, it was where I saw the introduction of raw grains into Irish whiskey was direct distillery to farmer commerce. It was distilleries buying grains off of a farmer. And before they got big enough to do the malting in-house, which, by the late Victorian era, a lot of them did their own malting, or some of it anyway. But even then, not all of it. But you had people basically splitting their buying power between a malting house and farmers. And that's why Pottsville was so associated with market towns, so associated with places like Tullamore or Cumber, or these kinds of prosperous places that would have a grain market where farmers would come. They're not in the middle of nowhere. It's not like a Scottish malt distillery like the Isle of Skye or someplace, in the fringe.
Yeah.
They tend to be in kind of convection point, these kind of conversion points for farmers, and they're bought on what used to be called a corn market, and corn in the old sense of being just grain of any kind. And so and I thought, well, this is a much more historically provable story, but also be a kind of ironically a better story, like you're talking about, because then we're back to that fabric. We're back to where did this all come from? It came from community. It came from the mixture, the convergence of agricultural necessity, what the land gave. There's a reason why you see like wheat kicking around, say like Leinster mash bills in a way you wouldn't see in Munster, because there's no bloody wheat. Again, Ulster has always had a love affair with oats. Even down to the bedrock. When you look at like plantings of, obviously oats and potatoes were rival plantings, and you can map that out. So again, the oats are obviously the older crop, and that kind of heartland stays where it is. But anyway, you have that kind of agricultural reality, and then you have human beings, cooperating. Whenever the temperance crowd kind of hound the distillers response is always, well, we are the farmer's friend, because you need to grow more. Here's the way that kind of pre-globalized agriculture economics worked, was that you needed to grow more than you needed, because if there's a bad year, you could have a famine, and you need to constantly grow more. But if you grow more and it's a bumper year, grain's going to be cheap, and it could drive the farmer into destitution because their grain could be worthless. And this is always, and so the distillers always come back and say, we are the farmer's friend. We can eat up the surplus. We can digest that. And that's always there. And unlike brewing, which only really, especially, modern beer, you can make beer out of other grains, but like modern British and Irish beer was basically a malted barley product. And distilling would step in. So it's a social history as much as anything. And that, as a root of pot still, it's more difficult to explain, but my God, it's a much better story, and B, reminds me of the essential idea of community that I value in Irish distilling today, that it is this kind of fabric that was produced, and we made this. It's not some dumb kind of, Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote, Fox and the malt tax nonsense. It's a story of place. It's a story of human hands and agriculture and that these mash bills change with that. This is ours. This is literally the root of Irish whiskey as a gastronomic tradition in such a sincere way that, my God, if this doesn't go through, I will be absolutely fucking heartbroken. I will live out my life on a bloody rock off the west coast of the Atlantic. I don't know if I can deal with this country if we turn our back on what we have. But there's so much there. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but
no, but just as you're saying, it's that fact of the community and the family and the giving off using what the land give, because as you just said about, there's like, if you go to Munster and there's wheat, you use that, but you weren't using oats because you didn't have oats. So it's these authentic things that are in the heritage of Irish whiskey. Is you can go to a distillery the other side of the country, and their mash bill be different than one up in north, and that's great because that's local to their area. That's the heritage behind.
Totally. I mean, like, there's a great quote. Dan Barber, who was kind of one of the followers of the kind of farm to table movement in food. But I read his book recently. It's called The Third Plate, and it was about, kind of where we are with global food systems. But he had a line where he said that most of the great cuisines of the world were born out of hardship. They were born out of a negotiation between peasants and a landscape. And, that landscape going to, you use what you have, and now the distilling industry industrialized it. It didn't, you have to go back to kind of early days of poaching to find that direct peasant in a landscape kind of intimacy. But the principle applies, and it is,
Of course.
It doesn't matter if you're an industrial Dublin Victorian distillery and you're buying it off farmers, or if you are a farm, you're beholden to the same logic,
Yeah, and especially as you say, there is like look at like Ireland's probably most famous dish, stew. It's we all love it, but it is literally what peasants would have had. It is chopped veg in gravy. Do you know? Yes, it applies to there being meat in it now, but that probably wasn't the case.
Yeah. What is distillation if not a way of preserving beer? Distillation itself, the way that the still leaked out of the apothecary, leaked out of the medical sphere into the field, was out of necessity, was out of a desire, especially in places. It's no accident that spirits took off where they did. Like, you look, why isn't whiskey an English thing? And you could say, oh yeah, Irish and Scottish history. And well, we've had a shared history for centuries. Why wasn't this picked up? And the best argument, I've ever heard was, well, they had hops. There were other ways of making beer last. That there were other ways of now, and again, like there's obviously the gin craze, and England does have a history of distilleries, but it's different, and it comes in later, and it has a distinctly urban feel. There isn't a history of illicit distilling in the same way. If you ever look through records of illicit distilling, and they'll be like Ireland, like rural Scotland, especially the Highlands, but then it'll be like Manchester, and be like, I'd love to know the story of like, the kind of Mancunian who's just making some illicit, whatever. The little bit you saw in England was all a very urban phenomenon. It was a bit, but totally, and again, much more in that kind of gin tradition. But it was, there is the idea that this just didn't need to, it's not.
Some of the greatest inventions come through the suffering.
Yeah.
And this is where things like this come around, especially in the boom of like the illicit distilling and the whiskey and the poaching. It was trying to get around someone the taxing. It wasn't,
and it's also like,
it wasn't because it was a bit of crack and you had loads of money.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, like, all these things, and obviously the tapestry of, it's not just us in England. There's a whole tapestry of drinks of distilled spirits across Europe, and
of course,
I don't mean to simplify it, but even so, like, you look at, like, successful French distilling. The reason cognac took off and Armagnac, remained a largely kind of local product on the global scales, because cognac was by the sea, and blah blah blah. There's logics behind all these things, but even ultimately a big baseline part is that spirits don't go off. That they're the ultimate preservative. That you have something from your harvest that is worth money, that has value as a barterable item, as a sellable item. Like, if you strip away the romance and you look at poaching, a big part of poaching was about getting access to the cash economy. A lot of people made poaching as a way of making ends meet, having something to sell, auxiliary income, and that all goes back to what distilling is, to what that act. Why have a still at all? And it's that for me, when people ask, and I get asked all the time about, like, oh, who came up with whiskey first, the Irish or the Scots, and I was saying, like, you're asking the wrong questions. You're asking the dull questions. The interesting questions are about folk foodways, about why people anywhere did this at all, and there's this kind of stupid last lap to first place. Isn't history. That's not real. That's branding bollocks. That's not real life of real people, and the real history, that kind of
it's
brown bread and water history, is so much richer. And again, in an extrapolated sense, that's how I feel, to answer your question about the technical file. At the end of the day, the technical file is about labeling. There's nothing, to stop someone from making something. But for me, it's about aligning the contemporary product with a kind of a self-described mythos that's actually based on something meaningful, rather than just, and like some people have said to me, and I've gotten horrible answers where people say, well, will it not confuse the category? Will it not deflate the market share? Like, this is not, now these are real concerns, but this is not the point. That's not what what these labels are for. Like, if we were just to invent categories and say, oh, well, Irish peated rye is a heritage, blah, blah, blah. It's a question of being, full of it or not. And
Exactly.
again, that's for me where the discussion kind of begins and ends, is authenticity, is sincerity, and the world just tastes fresher when you're not full of crap. When Irish pot still means a shared gastronomic tradition that includes 1960s Cumber as much as it includes, Victorian Monasterevin, as it includes Killowen, that this idea of lineage and of shared space and ideas and human hands is ending up on a label as to what we tell people we value, rather than just something we drafted in 2014 and can't be arsed to correct. But I think there will be change. I'm confident.
Good. So I did forget to ask. So the creator book, when's it out?
So it's a moving target. We've been fundraising for some time now, and we still have, if anyone's interested, the website creator.ie. Still about 30 places left. We've got about 40% of the text is written. We're looking at 2027, but we have no date nailed down, and I wouldn't want to put a date out and get it wrong.
No. I was looking just as a ballpark sort of year, like if it's
so 2027 is our goal. The bottle won't come out until 2028 because we want to put it out as a 7-year-old. Because of the whole not a drop sold till it's 7 years old. A lot of the old Cumber was a 7-year-old. Jameson, when it was a pot still, was a 7-year-old. There's a lot of resonance there. Yeah. So we're kind of hamstrung by chronology on that front. The book will certainly, come out within that space. But we should have, clear. And as soon as we have, and again, I'm glad we've taken the time we have. I'm very, very happy with the book. I think it reads very differently to A Glass Apart. But I am delighted with it. And that's entirely down to less to me as a writer than to what there is to write about. The world of Irish whiskey is so much richer now than it was in 2013. It's low hanging fruit. So it's a joy.
Well, I definitely have to say, with the stuff you brought to light for us all, it has definitely enriched the whole category.
Oh, thank you.
So we're talking 2027, and you said you're still taking on some.
So if anyone's curious about the crowdfunding, so the book will be public. The book is available to everyone once it comes out, but we've been funding it with this cask share. So I own a cask. Well, I don't actually own it, but we got a cask free from Boan of my thesis research. I was given first pick of the litter, and I remember because I didn't take any money off them when I did it. I was very keen that it remain, especially coming from that academic space, that it remain, pure and untainted by filthy lucre, and that I could make that. And I think I was in a position, again, with the Department of Agriculture, that I don't have any financial stake. I don't have a brand. I don't, whatever. I was able to talk freely because I'm not pushing my distillery. But similarly, at the end, the Coonies very generously came to me and they said, we'd love to give you a cask at least to show our gratitude. And like, look, I wasn't going to say no, but I have no use for a whole cask of whiskey. I don't need it. I think I'm well looked after in terms of drink.
I think
And
I
from
think you're
that,
the first man I've heard say I have no use for a cask of whiskey.
well, it's not. The pipe is ever flowing at the moment, and especially from that project. Now, I do like your idea of some sort of feudal tax over one bottle out of every barrel. I think I could become a tyrant yet, but in principle. So what I asked them to do is, said, would you set it up to 2 stacks? It's never mine, and then creators crowdfunding finances are all managed by 2 stacks. I actually have to give the crowd.
We spoke about this at Whiskey Live.
So the lads have been very, and they've never pressured for a take out of it. They've never said, oh well, would you put 2 stacks on the cover, or can there be more 2 stacks in the book? They did it purely out of, and again, I want to say the big heartedness of the industry now, and so all the money is Liam Brogan handles the spreadsheets, and we invoice back when we need, and it keeps the whole thing above board water for tax reasons, because then I never owned the cask, so it's all handled internally within that. And then we've done a few bottlings to raise funds along the road, and that's also again handled through that same kitty. Marcus and I can just invoice the system, so it's all it's fantastic. But if anyone's curious about that program, so if you buy into it, and it is a tall order, it's €250. And out of that 250, €7 is just a straight processing fee, but 40 quid is essentially parceled away, or within 40 quid is parceled away as a pre-order of the book. Just so we have enough money to guarantee people pre-orders, which is helpful going to publishers anyway, to have those kind of pre-orders built in.
Yeah, of course.
And then the rest, obviously goes into, again, all the expenses along the road. And we did travel quite a lot. People, again, we were out in Italy and France looking at manuscripts. We were out in Jerez in sherry country. We were off to America later this year. So it adds up. And obviously, I'm doing this as a full livelihood at the moment. Livelihood is a very rich word for it. I'm just doing this. And obviously Marcus does a wonderful job on the photography, and as really, again, is nowhere near looked after as much as he should be by his professional right. So it has been a labor of love for all of us. And Brian Green behind the scenes has been fantastic. So that's all. So there is that community. So that's 360 bottles out of that cask parceled. And then anything that comes up along the way, like when this Cologne that I was drinking earlier, the history of Eamon O'Cleary, that was a project based on this Bolcon, the old word for putching, basically, or ancestor drink to putching. So when we have these projects, we put them out to the crowdfunders, and they can be first, really the only ones in this case getting their hands on that stuff. And then Cologne very kindly put an extra 15 quid off of each bottle sale back in. So it's all a community driven thing. And then the last bit, and actually the bit that's turned out to be the secretly most rewarding part of the whole thing, is we do these talks, and on either in person, we do a range of in-person kind of get-togethers, but we also do online talks with experts on very, very focused topics. I think we're unique in Irish whiskey. I'll go that far, in terms of how far we'll chase a rabbit down a hole. So, like, for instance, we had one on peat, and we had the peatland scientist Mike Billett on to talk about the organics of peat, the so forth, and really chase, like, when you burn turf, what chemicals are you producing, but also the stakes that are involved, and dispelling some of the industry kind of mythology that's out there. Or when we had sherry, we go into the different types of sherry. We were talking about Montilla and how the PX comes, and we had Diego from who's a sherry cask trader himself come on. So we focus quite heavily, or we try and kind of talk about very unknown topics that people might not be kind of aware of. Like the history of 2.5 times distilling in Ireland, stuff that pet issues that have been kind of, 2.5, where you're like, not quite a double distillation, not quite a triple distillation. We've forgotten all this stuff. So it's a way of kind of inviting our supporters into something that's really, really unapologetically geeky. And we're happy
you-
with that, you know.
You're
And
creating a bit of a
welcome.
community there.
Yeah, you know, and I think I one thing that I've kind of never had a lot of time for is you sometimes hear, oh, Irish or whiskey is too nerdy. We need to be more accessible. And I think that it's a false dichotomy that you can be accessible and be nerdy. You know, there's nothing. When I meet one of the things I most love about the whiskey world is the kind of almost like dewy-eyed naivete of people wearing fucking lanyards, you know, drinking samples out of a boot of a car. I'm borrowing this actually from Angus MacGrail over in Scotland. He had a whole thing. He said the giddy lanyardism of the industry, but you know. I think it shouldn't be one or the other. It's not like, oh, water the category down. That's not being inviting at all. That's a kind of a false invitation. The big room is to allow everybody in on their own terms, shame nobody. And, you know, again, when people are super interested in wild yeast or whatever they may be, you know, that's not to be, who cares? You know, that's not turning anybody away. And if anything, they represent a fraction of whiskey drinkers. But you know, I'm always on the side of love. You know, love for the category, love for the drink. Welcome to other people. You know, but we don't have to create these kind of false cultural abstracts that you know.
This is it. At the end of the day, there needs to be a place for everyone in the communities. You know, if you want to go down, as you've said before, if you want to go down the rabbit hole and read a complete thesis, that's up to you. But
yeah, exactly. And I've chased
a few dram and talk about them and enjoy it. Go for it.
Totally. And like what I'll say about the creator community is that's developed around it is we will go down any rabbit hole you know we can find, but we will always hold your hand if you want to come with us, you know, regardless of where you're coming from. Even if this is your first online tasting, your first taste of whiskey itself, you know, we'll shut nobody out. But it is about the made thing. It is about the created drink. It's about the joy of nosing, the joy of tasting. You know, I find nosing itself a deeply rewarding and deeply social kind of joy. You know, when you talk to people, oh, I smell that. Oh, you're getting this. Oh, you're getting that. These long, bizarre lists of adjectives that people come up with. It's great crack, you know. And you know, yeah, you should always reject bullying, always reject preciousness, always reject exclusion. But sensory pleasure is pretty damn fun, you know. And I think you know, if not that, I certainly wouldn't subscribe to kind of the bland kind of good time escapism that proliferates a lot of the way that the alcohol industry sells itself. I think there's nothing there, you know. If you look at like the way a lot of big brands end up on billboards, it's a kind of a childish escapism that's being advertised. It's nothing that I derive a lot of meaning from. But if somebody does, you know, fuck me, let them at it. You know, I'd also be of that opinion. But I really do think that there is an untapped reservoir to talk about, both in inviting and welcoming and humble terms, you know, and to learn from each other. And I'm certainly, you know, I do like chasing rabbits down holes, but I've certainly not gone down every hole there is. And I think there's a great joy in learning. I think there's a great joy in sharing knowledge. And I think there's a great joy. And I think part of it, again, whiskey is not like vodka. It's certainly not like whiskey and Coke. It's and there's space for both of those, you know, and but there is a fascination in whiskey, and that's what wakes me up is wow. When I mean, you take mash bills, you take these histories, you take these intersections, there are these bigger questions, but they all kind of ripple into what we're smelling out of a glass. Ultimately, nose in a glass. That's where all of this intersects, you know, taste in the mouth, this liquid, you know, but there's so many aspects to it. And people come and I, you know, I think part of the big heartedness of Irish whiskey, I think better than other categories, Irish whiskey has that kind of duality in it at the moment. I think we just don't have it in us to be too exclusive. I don't think we uh, Irish people are too kind of copped on to be too precious about the drink. Like if someone was kind of, making much of themselves, they'd be called out pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's like, would you rein it in a bit?
Aye.
And we don't, there's that. And I think that's very psychologically helpful.
Aye.
I really
Would you
do.
get back in your box there? Come on.
Yeah, who does he think he is? A few notions on your man. I hope we never lose that in how we imagine the industry.
But it's also, just as you say, you'd be called out, but it's also I think the culture thing of the Irish to also have a laugh at yourself. You don't
Totally.
take things too seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Like whenever I've had to introduce myself, I say like, "Oh, I'm a whiskey writer," and I laugh while saying it. Like, whiskey writer, like and I think that's just in us. So the kind of you can't, and I shake the kind of laugh at the absurdity of calling yourself a whiskey writer, and not everyone feels that way. There's plenty of people who would be happy to tell you that they're an authority or this and that, and wear a special crest, and I just don't think we've got it, and hopefully we never do. And I think that's also a linchpin when you're talking about like the community infiltrating, or not infiltrating, but say like the permeability between consumer and producer in the Irish whiskey industry, I think is directly resulted to that. It's very difficult to feel aloof and precious here, because you'll always sit down with people, you'll always talk afterwards, you'll always,
Yeah.
and it's not that people in other parts of the whiskey industry aren't capable of that. I don't mean to paint the rest of the whiskey industry as aloof or abstract, but it is so, and again, it took Graham Cool, a Scottish blow-in to Kerry, to point this out to me and say like, yeah, it's strange that they all think they can get a hold of you. It's absurd. But it's again, there is an organicness about the Irish distilling industry at the moment, or the Irish whiskey scene, I should say, more than distilling industry, and
Yeah.
that includes pubs, that includes clubs, that includes consumers, that includes producers, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, of course, I 100% agree. So there's still places in your creator fund,
Yeah,
crowdfund.
at present, I think there are 31. Yes, out of 360 still to go. And we're going to keep. We have a few more projects up our sleeves in terms of liquids that we're putting out. So when you're buying, you're automatically an owner of the core cask, and then anything that incidentally comes along the way, it's like we do these projects with distilleries. All the chapters are based around these kinds of themes, and they're all either bits of history or stray conversations I've just had with people over the years that I wanted to chase up. But half the time they involve making something, and our idea is like, well, our supporters should have first bids on these kinds of strange liquids that emerge out of these. So again, the Bolcom was an example of that. But now Brendan has laid down more of that mash that will become a public thing, down the line. But we certainly got our choice of the cask, and we were first, and that was a big confidence. And like, look, I'm not trying to make anything exclusive to the crowdfunding, but I am delighted with this. Now this one's gone. This is gone last week, but there's more in the pipeline. And again, and once you join all the online hedge schools, we've done the hedge schools, what we call the videos, because it's all just kind of we teach ourselves these topics as kind of as best we can, but all that's an online archive, so it can be accessed. But if someone joins, they have access to watch all that stuff in repeat. So if they want to learn about bloody medieval distilling, that's all up on online. And I really do think we have the soup straight from the ladle. In that regard, I take great pride in those hedge schools we've done, because if I amn't competent to just say it myself, I feel like I have enough thirst that I'll go and find the person who is. And we had Derek Bratt from the University of Highlands and Islands. Derek is a Scottish PhD. He had done archaeology digging for illicit stills in the Highlands. So we had him on when we were doing Irish putching, because we wanted a bit of reference, when we were taken outside that Irish context and make the picture a bit broader. And anyone, all these people that I've admired through the years and I think can speak to something, or we had, again, Mike talk about Pete, or Diego talk about Sherry, we'll bring them in as kind of guest speakers on the night. And the more, and we've more still to come, but or we'd have the and stuff that I've found through the years that fascinates me. Like we had David Wondrich, the great cocktail historian, talking about punch, and you hear about punch all the time in kind of ye olde Ireland, funeral punch, wedding punch, this and that. But he's written a book on punch, and so we brought him on so anyone we can find who can offer new perspectives. But we're not spinning a yarn. We are at least in search of the truth, definitely, and with rabbit jaws.
That's great. So just as you were saying there, can you give a insight to any of the upcoming projects? Or
so the next live one, we're actually having a get together at the Technical File in Arthur's Pub on Thomas Street, and we'll have a number of producers. So Brendan Carty, Conor Ryan, Peter Cooney, anyone who is available and is doing non-GI pot still, to really kind of celebrate that will be a rallying cry. And then we're going to do an online one as well. So that's in the very immediate kind of future. But we have loads of ideas, and like, again, when we'll be off in America in the White Hill Forest, I fully intend to ask our forestry contacts out there to come and talk to us about wood online, to the supporters, as well as, because a lot of this stuff ends up in the book anyway, and so it's when we're going out and talking to these people, and it is a search for authenticity on all fronts. I think it's important to have a very low threshold for bullshit and a very high optimism for mystery, if that makes any sense. It's about reconciling those two. Stay wide-eyed and eager for new things, but keep your wits about you and don't buy any old shtick that's given to you.
That's a perfect reference. So I've only a couple more questions for you.
No problem.
If you had to recommend a whiskey for if you were recommending one for you think everyone needs to try this, what would it be?
I mean, how are we talking about? Like anybody alive, like Irish whiskey people, or like my instinct is John's Lane. That's what I usually just tell people who don't drink. Yeah, if someone from the Scotch world, or someone who's not even a whiskey drinker, is like, what do I, that is definitely the whiskey I drink the most of when I'm out. I really love that. Yeah, it is a John's Lane and a Guinness. If that's my kind of desert island combination. The way that kind of oil in the John's Lane and the cream in the pint, they're like call and response choir. It's wonderful. That would be my death row drink.
What a poetic way to put that. You're gonna have to put that on a card. Well, that's it there. That's your go-to to recommend with perfect straight away. What way? John Lane. And I always think I've always sort of been recommended that John Lane is the old style of pot still.
big, leathery, earthy, tobacco-y, but at the same time kind of marzipan, big texture, generous, mouth-filling, a bit crackly, but still,
lovely viscosity right through the mouth.
yeah, an absolute gorgeous. I don't know how I lived before it existed, you know. I don't know. Thankfully I was underage for most of those years, but the you know, it was only the bit in the middle that was, looking back, that explains, you know, the yeah, gorgeous whiskey.
And just what you said there about the John Lane and a Guinness. So if you had to pick Beamish, Guinness, or Murphy's?
Murphy's.
My man,
Yeah,
that's my number one pick.
yeah, definitely. Especially if you can get the rare pub where they move enough of it that it's fresh. You know, Murphy's is
Well,
weird, strange, soft, appley, strange streak in stout is unique. You know, it's a gorgeous pint.
like obviously you've been to Belfast. There's only, I think there's only like two pubs off the top of my head that actually serve Murphy's. One's obviously the Duke of York, and we would, like I've said this on a couple of the episodes of the podcast, but if I'm out with a friend of mine, we would go in and get what we would call the three wise men. We'd get at least, we would get a Guinness, a Murphy's, and a Beamish, and then always pick our favorite for the fourth pint. And my go-to is always Murphy's.
Oh, look, it's a gorgeous, you know. I mean, I think of the three of them, like Murphy's has that strange kind of weird whisper of green apple that is so unusual for stout. It's just different. Beamish has, and I never drink Beamish in Dublin because if you think, like you say, only a handful of pubs in Belfast, it's not that easy to get Murphy's in Dublin either. You know, you really need to go to Cork to get either Beamish or Murphy's in any sort of
Well, the last time I was down in Cork for down in Dublin for Whiskey Live, it wasn't exactly the easiest thing to find.
No, and again, like for me, like Beamish of the three is definitely the most coffee flavored. There's a kind of lovely roast. If you're down in some proper Cork pub, you'll get a lovely kind of roasted kind of taste off of Beamish. Pints of Dreamish, as they say down in Cork. But if you get stale Beamish, it tastes like instant coffee. It tastes like, you know, American coffee out of the tin. And a very, very mediocre drinking experience. So it's kind of a gamble up here. And then Guinness, like, you know, there's so much Guinness out there that it kind of, you can tell a good Guinness from a bad Guinness, but it's just the ubiquitous stout taste. You know, one of the things for me is, like, other than a slight stale taste, there's no really defining. The other two are different to Guinness. Guinness is not different to them. You know, it's a strange, probably because it's just everywhere, and so we don't think of it that way. You know, but when I think of the other two, it's like Beamish is more coffee-ish, and Murphy's is fruitier, and in the way that, like, stout even can be fruity. You know, it's not like it's a fruity beer, but there's that weird, like, appeline, if appeline is even an adjective, appley kind of green apple wisp at the back, or like the strange, like, sweetness, almost like a sour sweet. Field of Murphy's. It's almost refreshing. It's such a strange taste. But yeah, again, like, look, in Dublin, we're privileged to get, dare I say it, probably the freshest Guinness on earth. So who am I to complain? A nice pint of Guinness at the, you know, some proprietor with a John's Lane will do me well. So, you know,
So the last question on that is, what would be your go-to bar?
The Palace.
Palace.
So there are other contenders, but the Palace is definitely, like, on the same thing, where I drink the most, probably a little, you know, there's other wonderful pubs in Dublin, plenty of them. You know, I go to the Palace a lot because I like the staff, and they're you know, I think it's always important. I think I read some paper. It was like a psychology paper, and it was about having a local. And I think it is deeply important to be a returning customer somewhere, whether it's a pub or a diner or a coffee shop. But you know, there's something to be said for the old cheers, you know, where everybody knows your name, kind
Yeah.
of a feeling, you know. And certainly I have a close enough relationship with the Palace that I can go in and say hi to people. They know what I drink, and there'll be a bit of chat. And I'm very, you know, I'm very fond of the Palace. There are other fantastic pubs in Dublin. There are great Victorian interiors. You know, they're all the classics, the Long Hall, Mulligan's, Bowes. You know, further afield, the Lord Edward. There's a great pint in Stony Batter in Walsh's. That's a secret. That's a fantastic pint. A real gem if you're in Dublin is Cleary's under the bridge. That is the least touristy pub I can think of. You know, it is one of the great kind of North Dublin working class old man's bars. But that kind of working class bar with enough kind of old school class, you know, in that working class identity where they'll bring your pint to your table, you know, that kind of thing. You know, there's a real, again, old barman's kind of respect around the whole thing. I love Cleary's, also a very affordable pint, which, well, no Dublin pint is affordable, but by Dublin standards, shockingly affordable. I think even they can't charge this anymore, but the last holdout of the £5 pint in Dublin, as far as I know. Those would be classics within the whiskey space. Certainly, I honestly think there's more space for whiskey bars in Dublin. I really do. I think if I think of like the great whiskey bars of the island, I'm amazed. Like if you think of like the great Scottish whiskey bars, and immediately on that list would be like the Pot Still and the Bon Accord and all these pubs that are in Glasgow, urban bars. I'm amazed that Dublin doesn't have more. And there's bars that have big heaped collections, but they're not
whiskey bars.
They're not whiskey. You know, when you walk into like again the Pot Still in Glasgow would be a great example. You walk into the Pot Still, any barman there will know what's on the shelf. They'll have opinions. They'll know the difference between Lafroig and Ardbeg, and they'll have a preference. You know, that kind of stuff. And we were missing that in Ireland until very, very recently. You know, not just having heaps and heaps of bottles on a shelf, and half of them are bloody sourced coolies or G&Ds anyway, but having barmen who really loved the category, who had a lot of knowledge, you know, and you'd be looking at like the Shelburne for that, or Dick Max, you know, they're around now, but I'm amazed that Dublin doesn't have more of them. You know, it's a strange conundrum, and one I'd love to see. And I think because part of it is that whiskey is seen as a very tourist facing investment for a lot of bars, that, you know, and it's a different kind of tourism. It's not, you know, Scotland gets a lot more actual dram tourism of like people going, they're in Scotland to see distilleries. They're not in Scotland and going to see distilleries. They're there for whiskey, you know. And we don't get as much of that in Ireland, north or south. You know, it's just that tourism. Now, I glory be the day people come and it's not just I'm in Belfast, so I might as well go to Bushmills. It's like I'm here for whiskey, and here's my itinerary. And I'm going to be in Bushmills one day, I'm going to be in Cologne the next, and I'm going to be in Redmond the next, you know, but it's just not there yet. But certainly those would, I suppose if I was to narrow it down to where I actually tend to drink, Cleary's is the secret, but almost one to not let out too loudly because Cleary's is great. It's like it looks dodgy as fuck. It's under a bridge, but great old boozer and proper old school interior. And then there's all the classics, the Long Haul, etc. Blah blah blah. But yeah, I really think there is space in Dublin for Bows have a whiskey thing, the Palace have a whiskey thing, but there's still a thirst. There's still and for something organic. I mean, I look even at Belfast. I mean, I haven't been into Sam McDonald's new project, but you know that's a very striking proposal to have single casks. Obviously, the Duke of York is legendary.
I need to actually call. I'm going to get him on the podcast and go and call over and have a chat with him.
Yeah, so I know Sam, but I've never darkened the doors. So I'll try and rectify that someday. And then obviously, like we have the cocktail scene. Bar 1661 has been a huge. That's not really a pub, but huge addition to the drink scene in Dublin. So it's there, but yeah, and look, I think early on, because I was down in Dick Mac's this weekend actually, and I was staring, and when I go down there, I tend to sleep above the place, which is a wonderful thing to do. You know, a great geography of just walking from the bar to your bed. I recommend it to anyone. You know, it's a very easy transition.
Yeah.
But I remember looking at the shelf and thinking there should be more of this in Ireland, of the sincerity that all these bottles are there because, you know, Finn spoke to somebody. You know, it kind of keeps pace with the scene. It's a pub whose collection, it's not a big flight of like Middleton Very Rare from every year or something inaccessible that doesn't mean anything to you and me. It is real. It's affordably priced, and it's kind of changes with the weather of what's going on in Irish distilling. And I really wish we had more of that. I think there's been the single casks were great for giving pubs kind of something to cherish, you know. And I know, like, obviously it was under the Friend at Hand banner, but still, Willie Jack, the Duke of York, have theirs. The Palace have theirs. You know, they're scattered around. Sonny Malloy's out in Galway, etc. But I really think there's space to grow in that how to put it, like staff training. You know, having huge collections. You can go into Temple Bar and you'll find massive collections, but it's not organic in the way that Dick Mac's is. It's not based on, well, we had a conversation with something, and this it's and again, I whenever I'm out in Scotland, I envy them this. Like, I remember going out to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Edinburgh, their Edinburgh headquarters, and drinking at the bar there, and you'd be up and you'd be drinking like a Glen Scotia, and you say, could I have something that has this kind of level of peat, but maybe, you know, this grease as well, but maybe throw a bit of sherry in the mix, and the barman would find you something that meets that. We're not there yet in Ireland, you know, and I envy them that. But I think I really do think the best days for Irish whiskey are ahead. I believe that in that cultural sense, anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Whole thing's trust.
Definitely, but one I would recommend next time you're up in Belfast is to try the Garrick. They have you been in the Garrick? No,
I have, yeah, once.
So they have the sort of back room, and they launched a bar book, but they have different whiskey flights, and they have like a exclusive release from Killowen. I think they have exclusive release from Dunville's, and then Copeland, and there's someone else in there, and I can't remember who.
Grand. Well, my problem in Belfast is I always just end up in the Duke of York and don't leave. You know, I have a homing badger Paul's ear off for a day, and you know, but I was in the Garrick just twice, but once was very, very. I was picking someone up. I wasn't in there long enough, but lovely, lovely spot. But again, and there's room. Everything I just said about Dublin, I think, is applicable to Belfast too. That
Yeah,
there is space for that engagement and that kind of a model of, um, that you're talking to a barman who wants to walk you through the flavors, and
yeah,
we really, that's the next frontier in Irish whiskey hospitality, is having that kind of space, you know. Um,
exactly, because it's a experience. You know, that's when you're going somewhere and someone can give you that level of care to what you want. That's the experience.
yeah, and I think that'll come with time. I really do. Time um, and honesty, and that's not to bring it back to Creator, but like what I want from that book that was not in A Glass Apart was A Glass Apart was about whiskey, full stop, really. And a very specific type of whiskey. Obviously, it was just about single pot still. And it had pages that were bottles and descriptions, nose, palate, finish, background information, overall thoughts, that kind of format. And it had the description of the process and the changes that decisions in the process could make to flavor and blah blah blah. But I wanted a book that was about the Irish whiskey scene, about what is happening in the present, and that belongs to us, and that we feel a connection to, and that could arm, whether it be brand ambassadors or bartenders or anybody in between, but a sense of being a stakeholder in this kind of shared gastro culture, in this
Yeah,
shared drink, and that this is ours. And no, and to present what I thought were the best bits of the thesis, again, the broad overview of the recipes or the tidbits, but all grounded in this idea that we're all, this is a public access well, as it were, and we can all draw
yeah,
water from it, and to do that in a way, and to write it in a way that was as inviting as possible, and uh it, it is still a book about liquid and about flavor and flavors that I admire and this and that, but it is also a book about us. And I mean, like, us now, the people
yeah,
drinking it, the people making it, the people selling it, that uh, there's an energy in the room that just wasn't there in 2013, you
yeah. Of
know.
course,
Um,
completely agree. And as you say, it's um, it's a it's a different game from 2013. It's a different community, different spirit, different game. It's different. There's there's different energy. There's um there's a almost a nuance about it.
totally. And I think it's matured a bit. I think originally there was so much, there was the kind of, as would happen in any booming category, there was the kind of cash grab, and there was a lot of white noise. And I've had trouble with some brand owners who have kind of said, like, who's this little shit telling people my story is not real, but what can you do? And at the same time, I think Irish whiskey has grown up a lot. But it's almost astounding. It's like we kind of rubbed our eyes collectively as a category, and kind of blinked back into, and it all seemed obvious then that we were interested in these old recipes or old, all this stuff. But Irish whiskey wasn't that until very, very recently. Like, I remember being at the inaugural meeting of the Irish Whiskey Society in Bowes, and they passed around the Tyrconnell finishes. Remember, there was the sherry, the Madeira, and the port. And that was the most exciting thing in Irish whiskey, that there had been a finish. And you're like, that now seems so banal,
Exactly.
but then it was like, wow, holy shit, they moved it from one cast to another. This is,
Yeah, that was innovation.
yeah. And I remember when Dingle Distillery was set up, and there was the oh my God, there's another distillery in Ireland. There's like, depending on how you do the counting, either 3 or 4 beforehand. 3 and like a little batch lab for one of the 3, so 4 at a push. But there were essentially 3 distilleries in Ireland, and then wow, there's another, and now there, but then now we're in the talk of closures or mothballing, or there's certainly slowing down of building. It has, but we're still at like roughly 45, so it has exploded from what it was, and it was always, there was always going to be a sobering moment, a kind of a that but I honestly think now that the kind of gold rush has kind of calmed down a bit, is the time that you're also hearing people kind of clarify their identities, like what do we stand for? It's not enough to just have a quaint little distillery in a nice looking part of Ireland and go, oh, well, we're selling mystique of landscape, we're selling whatever. You need to earn your bread, and
Yeah, well, this is back to what we talked about earlier, was when the history isn't there to back you up, tell your story, be authentic. It's you can try and spin a story, but when transparency will see through it, just be authentic.
Yeah, and I also think that's why people connect, and you can see it. The proof, the evidence is in the pudding. Like you see the way that people do connect with authentic storytelling. And I don't even want to call it storytelling, because unfortunately all these words have been corrupted by kind of LinkedIn brand speak. But the likes of Brendan, people do feel an emotional connection to that, and with good reason, because he's waking up each day and thinking like, oh, I'd like to try a bag of this or a bag of that. Now I think there's also, on the other end, there's producers that have a passion around production and aren't making themselves clearly heard, and I think could do with a bit of PR boost. And especially there's a weird energy up your way, like Copeland, Redmond. There's enough electricity up there to turn on a light bulb, with a snap. But I don't think anybody knows about a lot of this stuff. That there's, again, David with his weird kind of projects behind the scenes, or coping with but I think a lot of that stuff is going to come out anyway, and that's just a question of time and dividends. But look, none of this was here before. It's all very sudden. And I feel much better about Irish whiskey. I used to be very afraid that Irish whiskey was just going to turn into a category of unpeated triple distilled malt, because that's what people thought would sell, and that there would be an awful lot of sameness, and it is there, and almost like a kind of Bushmills show band tribute act category, or on the pot still front, a Middleton show band tribute act category, and kind of the two, which early on did look like what was happening, like those two,
It was, look, we can do it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've really, thank God, steered clear. Well, not steered clear of it. It's still there, but cunningly.
People try and make their own story now. People actually using the initiative to try and make their own story, to make their own spirit.
Absolutely. It's and more of the same. So yeah, I think the future for Irish whiskey, from a material and from a kind of gastronomic and from a consumer, dare I say it, perspective, is very bright. And look, the whole drinks world is caught up in macroeconomics that it has no, like, we can't stop soaring production costs that are tied up with Russo-Ukrainian wars. There's only so many things we can do, or tariffs to America, or whatever. There's so many things that are out of our sphere of control. But my God, have we become kind of captains of our own little ship in a way that I didn't know we had it in us. And I'm very, very glad to be on board. Not to stretch the metaphor.
Yeah, no, of course, and I completely agree with you. To be riding the wave with people is amazing.
Mm, totally.
Um, Especially as you just said, is from what where we started to where it's become now. Obviously,
Yeah.
what what goes up must come down, and unfortunately, there has been a few casualties there, but a lot of people holding on strong, which is great to see.
Oh, look, and dare I say, there will probably be more casualties. That's just the nature of one thing history really gives you a taste for is perspective, you know? And like even in the golden age of Irish, we tend to think of distilleries as kind of immortal things, you know, like Bushmills, you know, has been here forever. Talisker has been here forever. Even in the good old days, in the Victorian times, there were distilleries that started up and failed, or went out of business, or there was some financial mishap, or something. That's just what happens in the history of an industry, you know,
Yeah,
and that's you know, and when you see it happen again in the past in such broad terms, you feel kind of safer about the present, you know. I think and you look like I think what we can very much learn from Scotch whiskey history is that Scotch whiskey has seen the peaks and troughs of the 20th century. You know, in the 80s, they had what they called the Scotch whiskey lock, where they produced too much stock and then they couldn't sell it. And they ended up with, massive surplus. Irish whiskey was in such doldrums at that point that we kind of sat the 20th century out, so we don't have that.
yeah,
You'd have kind of elder statesmen in Scotch whiskey who would remember these times and could kind of bring the kind of steadying hand and say, "Don't worry, we've been here before." But Irish whiskey outside Bushmills and IDL doesn't even have that industrial memory, you know.
yeah,
And even within Bushmills and IDL, the story was very different. It was that we were always on the rocks and we were struggling to get back into the mainstream, you know.
yeah,
So it's not even the same historical memory, you know. But it's worth being aware of that these things do come. And I mean, whiskey is a slow food. This one of the slowest foods I know of. It takes years and years and years. So whenever there's demand, production surges, and then there's overproduction, and then but then you have loads of stock dropped on the market, and then you get the same thing. Like, look what happened in Scotland with indie bottlers. Indie bottlers came out of distilleries having loads of stock that couldn't shift. Indie bottlers picking up old casks at a song, and then you have this wonderful scene of all these Scottish indie bottlers putting out great value expressions of aged single malts. And then now, as whiskey was doing well, it was swinging the other direction, where even within the core brands themselves, all the mass was falling off the bottles. And what might have been a 10-year-old is now given some stupid name like Cascade Crash or something. And but then I guarantee you, within the next few years, they're all going to start having maths again because the stock is there,
yeah,
and that's just what happens, you know.
yeah.
But it's
No,
again, the past gives us a long view.
yeah. If we pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's the old adage, those who do not read history are doomed to repeat it. But then there's the historians extra bit, which is those who do read history are doomed to sit by as history repeats itself and nobody listens.
Well,
And,
well, that's one for you.
exactly.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you.
No problem.
I have had an absolute wonderful chat.
Similarly.
Thank you very, very much for spending 2.5 hours of your life talking to me.
Grand. And look, while we've been talking, the sun has set, the temperature has dropped. I may even return to that smoky whiskey.
Well, I'm actually playing around with the idea of going to sit out the back for 10 minutes to cool myself down.
Good man. I might actually do the same. Well, I can't. There's foxes out the back. I have a family of foxes. There's a mother and 3 cubs out there, so I've been trying to kind of give them a bit of peace. But because they're gorgeous to look at, but they're awful shy, and I certainly don't want a mother fox taking issue with me anyway. So
Well, that's it exactly. You gotta play it safe on that regard. But
Grand.
well, hopefully you'll come back on the podcast at another point.
Anytime.
Yeah. So I'll let you enjoy the rest of your night, and I'm gonna go cool off. Greatly
Bye, mate.
appreciate you coming on, and I will speak to you again soon.
Cheers, Lee.
Thank you very much.